very nice. Really?
Yeah.
But why Mexico City? Is there any particular reason or?
He's completing and he was offered a teaching position at a university. So
Nice. Wow,
yeah.
very nice.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I am Zsuzsa Csergő, Director of Virtual vASN and Professor of Political Studies at Queen's University, Canada. I'm delighted to welcome you to this new season of the Virtual vASN webinar series. Our goal in this series is to discuss major salient issues about nationalism and ethnicity, primarily those arising in the region traditionally covered by vASN, which is a pretty wide swath of territory comprising diverse subregions of Europe and Eurasia, but also broader issues that affect people everywhere. This global virtual platform enables us to combine these two goals. And indeed, the topic discussed by our panelists today is an issue of global significance that was triggered by events in Eastern Europe. Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine has been in the center of our attention for most of us working in this field. And Virtual vASN has hosted a series of discussions about the war. We will continue to focus on it. And our panel today focuses on the big question of why so many governments in the global south have accepted the Russian narrative. In other words, the aggressor's narrative about the war, refusing to condemn the Russian invasion at the UN and to join Western economic sanctions. I would like to thank Professor Peter Rutland for organizing the panel, moderating the discussion. And Professor Rutland is a leading scholar of Russian politics who needs no introduction to members of vASN. He is vice president of vASN, also a member of the Virtual vASN Planning Committee. He holds the Colin and Nancy Campbell Chair for Global Issues and Democratic Thought at Wesleyan University. And I would also like to welcome and thank our three panelists, prominent scholars in the field, for sharing their expertise on this very important question. And I will now give the virtual floor over to Professor Rutland.
Okay, thank you, Zsuzsa. And we couldn't have a more important topic and a better time for it, because with the BRICS summit in South Africa just 3 weeks ago, and then the G20 summit in New Delhi last week, this topic of how the global south is being impacted by the war in Ukraine and how they are responding to that war is of crucial importance. And I'm very pleased to have three scholars joining us today with expertise in these topics. And it's a truly global panel. We have Dr. Maria Blancas, who is in Mexico City now, and she has completed a PhD at King's College London. We have Nalin Mohapatra, who is a professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi, who's an expert on Central Asia and Russian politics more generally. And we also have Bhaso Ndzendze, who is a head of International Relations Department at the University of Johannesburg, has written extensively about the BRICS, has a book about artificial intelligence and IR. And we are posting in the chat section follow-up biographies of our three speakers. So without further ado, I will invite them to speak. Each person will speak for about 10 minutes, and then we will open it up and take questions which audience members can post in the Q&A. We'll be using the Q&A for the questions, not the chat. And we will wrap all this up in 1 hour's time. And I salute our panelists for coming from different time zones. I guess it's 8 a.m. for Dr. Blancas, and it's 9:30 p.m. for Dr. Mohapatra, and I'm not sure what time it is, probably 4 o'clock in the afternoon in South Africa. Okay, so Maria Blancas, you're going to be on first.
Well, hello. Thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting and relevant panel. I've got to say that the issue of the war for Mexico has been sort of a distant issue. However, it has impacted us in many different ways, because to begin with, of course, supporting one side or the other, has constituted a challenge for our government. Normally, Mexico's foreign policy tilts towards doing the right thing, as we have been doing so since maybe around the 1940s, since our president back then, President Avila Camacho, made a very strong pronunciation against the German invasions in Europe. And the same when Mexico also opposed to the Anschluss quite energetically. And our ambassador back then, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Eduardo Hey, actually expelled the German ambassador back then. So from those times to our current times, there is a big gap, unfortunately, because our government has gone to the neutrality, that it's a neutrality that has favored the oppressor instead. Because of course, in Latin America, as it has been natural, due to our proximity to the United States, of course, Russian narratives and the support for Russia has been widespread in general. So it is very common for us to find people who have favored Russia's position for the same reason. Because unfortunately, in certain mindsets around this part of the world, being against the United States means being with Russia. But of course, this is a bit of a mindset of idealizing what you don't have close. So it's the same for China. A lot of people have been idealizing China on my side of the world. So in this regard, as opposed to our former energetic declarations in the UN against invasions of other countries, this time Mexico has been sort of adopting a lukewarm position. It was until quite recently, not in this G20 meeting, but in the previous one, when our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Ebrard, actually said that the Russian invasion in Ukraine was a problem because, of course, the United States and Canada, they are our closest partners, and they provide a lot of grain on our side of the world. So obviously, Mexico is quite interested and keen on solving and supporting the grain deal in Ukraine. And naturally, because of course the prices are affecting us as well. And currently with our Minister of Foreign Affairs, because Mr. Ebrard stepped down from the post because he wanted to aim for the presidential candidacy, we now have Ms. Alicia Bárcena, and she has also been a little bit more strong on the position of condemning the Russian aggression in Ukraine. But I could say that it's a little bit too late for us, but there's a proverb that says that better late than never. However, in terms of public opinion, although there are people supporting Russia, mostly people who are very supportive of our federal government, there are a lot of people around the country who are actually against the war and who have also voiced concerns against the war and even donated to the causes of supporting Ukraine. And for us as Mexicans, it's a little bit hard to ignore the part of violence, because of course, due to the drug war, we have been witnessing atrocities and cruelty in our own country. So somehow supporting Ukrainians, it's a way of being sympathetic to them, because unfortunately, living with violence is something that, it's horrible to say it, but until you are close to it and until you see it, you start understanding how it feels like. So in this regard, public opinion in Mexico, like people outside and citizen opinion, so as to say, they are very supportive of Ukrainians. And in terms of media coverage, except for maybe one or two media sources, most of the media has been supportive of Ukraine during this whole time, and they have reported everything just as it is. Like Russia did this today, Russia did this a couple of days ago, so they have been quite accurate in general. So in that regard, media coverage in Mexico has been quite accurate in general. So yeah, this is how it has been managed in general terms in Mexico. And of course, there's still some, let's say, some controversies regarding the presence of the Russian embassy here and the role it has been playing in our society and in our politics. Because not very long ago, there was a problem of US authorities demanding that an explanation, because all of a sudden we were told that the biggest number of Russian spies on the world, they all are in Mexico. And coincidentally, the Russian embassy has a very, very long list of people working in the embassy. But for us, that was also a surprise, because why did our Ministry of Foreign Affairs was registering this amount of people? So obviously, that's a little bit of a current controversy. But yeah, that's pretty much the major, let's say, the major important things of our position of the Russian invasion to Ukraine and in Mexico in general. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria, for covering both the government position and the popular attitudes, and also putting it in that very interesting historical context. And now I'll hand the floor over to Dr. Nalin Mohapatra for a perspective from New Delhi.
Thank you, Professor Rutland. It is indeed a pleasure to participate in such a conference, though it is a virtual, but we are sharing our opinion, and it is truly a Global South Forum, and my whole issue can be, we can discuss the whole issue of Russia-Ukraine conflict from three structural frameworks. The first important point is, yes, it is a conflict between Russia and Ukraine, but the point is it has a spillover effect, and the whole world is suffering because of the war. Look at the crisis the world community now currently confronting: food crisis, fuel crisis, and fertilizer crisis. So what I can see is that the prolonging of this Russia-Ukraine conflict will have a detrimental impact on global sustainable security goal which we are talking about. The second important point is that this war actually provided an opportunity, historic opportunity to reevaluate international relations and to locate where Global South is actually fitting into it. And if you look at the whole discourses from a Global South perspective, I think one view which emanating from India is that, yes, India believes in the principle of dialogue and diplomacy to address the issue rather than war. Second important point is India's view is that we should respect international law. Third important point which India advocates is that respecting sovereignty and territorial integrity. So these are some of the principal positions which Indian government has outlined over the last 1 year. And if you look at the voting pattern of India, you will say, definitely we have taken a very positive stand. We abstained from voting in February 2022 and in 23 also, February 23 in the UNSC resolution. But at the same time, India has also opposed the Russian proposition in which they adopted with the support of Belarus and North Korea in March 2022, and India abstained from there. So India is taking a positive stand, a positive neutrality, or what we call strategic autonomy. We have a very good friendship with Russia because Russia is our historical and traditional strategic partner. And now Russia is one of the major supplier of oil to India. At the same time, Russia also provides us fertilizer, okay, in form of urea. So, and at the same time, you can also notice now, as per the CIPRI yearbook of 2022, now around 65% of our defense equipments we are importing from Russia. So this position, I think, the global community has to understand. Even United States President Joe Biden, he has also appreciated India's position. And when the war erupted, immediately Prime Minister Narendra Modi talked to both President Putin and President Zelensky of Ukraine. So India is actively involved in resolving the crisis. India is the global power. Our economic growth is around 7.5%. So what is important for us is to get access to oil. Means we have to secure oil also from, because we have to import oil from Russia also. That is also a concern which the world has to understand. The second important point is that throughout, if you see at the sideline of Samarkand SCO summit, Prime Minister Modi said, "This is not an era of war." I think this is a very, very strong message to the global community that yes, we should sit in dialogue and negotiation and resolve the issue. And as far as there is a consensus in India about India's policy towards the Russia-Ukraine war. And at the same time, you will also find at the local level, the community, the local people, they are also appreciating the government's position, Indian government's position on Russia-Ukraine war. But also, I will tell you another important point but there are certain areas like in recent years, particularly Russia's growing engagement with China is a cause of concern for us. This is an area of concern. Secondly, Russia holds a different perspective on Indo-Pacific. So that is actually, we are an Indo-Pacific player along with United States, Australia, and Japan, and Russia's position is quite different. So that is an area where we can find there are some differences between India and Russia. But the overall, if you see, India advocates the need for dialogue and diplomacy to resolve the war. And yes, actually, it impacted us. The war impacted India. For example, the oil prices increased, and as I explained it a little bit just before that we used to import a lot of fertilizers from Russia, and that impacted our agriculture. So this is another area where we have to think that yes, there are certain impacts we are also feeling, but the positive aspect, another important point which I will highlight here is the G21 declaration. Because why I'm saying G21? Because African Union is now part of G20. So G21 declaration, you will find that there is a consensus. So that actually makes India the global power. And I think in the forthcoming years, India will play a major role in resolving the crisis between Russia and Ukraine. But one point that we have to add here is that at the same time, we have a very strong and robust relationship with United States. And in recent years, we are moving ahead in terms of strategic partnership. So what I can say is that the problem, I think the United States policymakers, they should also engage with Russia. The present problem why Russia is tilting towards China is that there is a what many scholars they say, there is the United States is alienating Russia actually. So there is a need for more and more pragmatic engagement with Russia, and I think that can be a better way to resolve the crisis. So these are some of the issues which I think we actually in India we think of the way to resolve the crisis. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Nalin, for those insights and presentation of how this conflict is being viewed in India. As you say, a very important player now, maybe a pivotal player in trying to resolve this conflict. Now we'll move on to Professor Bhaso Ndzendze in University of Johannesburg.
Thanks a lot, Peter, and greetings, everyone. So South Africa's position has changed quite a bit. I think the country's foreign minister, Dr. Nalin, reacted almost in real time to the crisis, to the outright invasion of Ukraine by Russia, but quickly had to kind of pull back because there was division within her government. There was division within the ruling party, which has ruled since 1994 here in South Africa after the transition from apartheid. So, and this shows the sort of indecisive nature of the ruling party. It is a party of the center left, but it is a party also of sort of big tent politics. And this has been evident. So the very same day, within a few hours, that she was condemning the invasion, calling for Russia to retreat from Ukraine and to respect the sovereignty of other countries in accordance with the UN Charter. The Minister of Defense, on the other hand, was with about 13 hours after the invasion, was at the Russian embassy, I think celebrating Russia's Armed Forces Day or a holiday of this nature. And so that for me captures the essence of South Africa's position when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war. And this division reflects in society as well, where there are those who are staunchly pro-Ukraine, and there are those who are actually pro-Russia on the ground. But the government's position, of course, is neutrality. It is, as the government calls it, non-alignment. So taking it back to the Bandung conference, the famous position of the non-aligned countries. And so that has been South Africa's stance. However, this does not satisfy everyone because it seems to be in terms of rhetoric, neutral, non-aligned, but in practice, there are hints that it leans pro-Russia, and there are a few episodes to indicate this. The first, of course, was the vote to abstain from the resolution last year, the UNGA ES 11, where the country and a few of its regional neighbors voted, basically abstained. And the countries that did, there was only one country from the continent that voted against the resolution to condemn Russia, and that was Eritrea. And there is a special relationship in formation or even maturing there between Eritrea and Russia. But for South Africa and a couple of countries in the region, although they're just over the 55% mark of the countries on the continent voted in favor of condemning. And of those, the three notable ones were Tunisia, Nigeria, and Egypt. And these are countries that also import the most wheat from Russia and from Ukraine. So the incidents that have made it seem, much to the government's chagrin in some instances, that it is pro-Russia more than pro-Ukraine, and certainly more than non-aligned, is in addition to the vote, the abstention in the UN General Assembly last year, was also in December last year the docking of a Russian vessel called Lady R near Cape Town in Simonstown in December of last year. And in May of this year, the US ambassador took it a step further and said that he had evidence that the ship did not just dock in Simonstown, but it also was the recipient of weapons from South Africa. This was denied, of course, by the government, and the ambassador also had to later kind of walk back what he had said when there was an investigation. It seems to have been a haphazard statement. There isn't sufficient proof that South Africa did indeed arm Russia. Although there are question marks around receiving this sanctioned vessel, of course, South Africa will say it is its right. It is a sovereign country, and it can do what it pleases with its ports. That argument was also made, I think, around March or April of this year, when South Africa and Russia engaged in joint naval exercises. This was kind of a polarizing episode, but it didn't make a big splash. There were some protests, but really not the kind of protest we are used to. And we have been called the protest capital of the world. Then later on, to kind of walk the talk, or to walk the talk when it comes to non-alignment, South Africa and a few other countries from the continent around June of this year took to Ukraine and to Moscow to present a 10-point peace plan, but the outcome was ambiguous at best. There was kind of a lukewarm reception within the two countries, and Vladimir Putin outright dismissed some of the proposals that were being made. There was also then the big issue around the BRICS summit and whether South Africa would host Vladimir Putin, given that there's an ICC warrant out for him. And South Africa is a signatory of the Rome Statute and is therefore obligated to arrest Putin. But this led to really some new interpretations of the Rome Statute. Some saying South Africa has an obligation to acknowledge the notification from the ICC and that it had done that and that it had to apply its mind, but the actual action of what to do is up to South Africa to interpret. So it was an agonizing decision, and there was eventually a mutual decision between our president and President Vladimir Putin not to attend the BRICS summit and to, of course, instead send Sergei Lavrov. So basically, I would say there are 7 reasons why South Africa is taking the position that it has, and I'll just go through them quickly. The first is a little bit like what Maria said about Mexico, that there is kind of fatigue around US dominance. And so the war is interpreted as really a showdown between NATO and Russia. And America is seen as the hegemon, as the bad guy, or equally bad player, in that it needs some balancing, that it has enjoyed unipolarity for far too long. The other is, as I've said, is that the ruling party is a broad church party, it is a big tent party, and therefore there's bound to be these contradictions. There's also the hope. South Africa still, comes from a history of a peaceful transition, and there are those within that party who then think that South Africa could be a key player in terms of negotiation. We did ourselves have a negotiated settlement from white supremacist rule to democracy. So I would say that's a third reason, kind of positive interpretation that South Africa wants to be neutral, wants to be non-aligned, so that it has the credibility to be a negotiator and adjudicate. Then more nefarious reading is that the ruling party is funded or is funded by the Kremlin, business interests linked to the Kremlin. And so this year there was a disclosure of a couple of millions of dollars coming from a company linked to a sanctioned Russian oligarch. There's also, of course, a long history of alignment between the USSR and the ruling party now. During the struggle for freedom, a lot of people were exiled and went and received training in Russia, and so that explains these linkages. But many of them also got training in Ukraine, which kind of baffles me why it's so easy to take a kind of pro-Russia position, given that a lot of people were actually, trained in places like Odessa in Ukraine because it was part of the Soviet Union. So why does Russia exclusively inherit the post-Soviet legacy and the goodwill that comes from the assistance it provided. And then there is also kind of a position that says, look, we may be with Ukraine, but we frankly don't have the muscle. We are a weak state. This is a conflict, it's a showdown between big, powerful states. And so it's useless to even express a position in favor of Ukraine or Russia. But yeah, there's nothing you can do in any case. So this has informed the country's position. Both those who are, I would say, pro-Ukraine and pro-Russia, kind of both recognize, however, that the best that the country could do is to express, verbal support and nothing really beyond that. And I would say there have been other things like, the visuals of Africans being denied access to trains last year, to get out of Ukraine when it was being bombed, did influence quite a lot of people to actually be suspicious of Ukraine and to even buy into the denazification narrative that Vladimir Putin partially used to justify the invasion. But in the media, we also see this polarization. There is just no singular South African position. There was and this is my last point, there was the only petition I've seen around this war in South Africa, where actually it was saying South Africa should get out of the conflict, should bring back its people from the affected country. And this petition got about 30,000 signatures within a space of maybe 3 days, and in a country of about 60 million. So that was quite it does indicate some traction. And yeah, so it speaks volumes that the one time there was a petition, it was really to emphasize neutrality, to urge the government to be more neutral, and to not take a position and to pull back from its initial position of condemning Russia's actions. So thank you very much. I will end there.
Right, thank you, Bhaso. And it's certainly, I mean, we're all trying to find some positive way forward, right? It's a very grim situation. And yes, I take your point that Mexico, India, and South Africa are physically distant from the conflict and probably see themselves as basically powerless to really influence one way or the other. That said, I liked your point about the negotiating the transition from the apartheid regime. If people with such polarized interests and identities can actually sit down and make a deal, that's kind of inspiration for all of us, that at some point the Russians and Ukrainians will talk to each other, will have to talk to each other and reach some kind of lasting peace. But it's not going to happen anytime soon, unfortunately. So we do have a question from the audience. Now I would encourage other audience members to chime in. And one theme that emerged from all three presentations was that Russia's relationship with Ukraine is not being seen separate from Russia's relationship with the United States, right? So to some extent, all three of you kind of acknowledged that it's being seen as a proxy war between the United States, NATO, and Russia. And that means that the Russia-Ukraine relationship, the dyad, is being downplayed. And Ukraine is being treated as less important than the Russia-Ukraine relationship. So I would like to ask you if that characterization is accurate. And the question from the audience kind of followed up on that by saying, how do people in your parts of the world view the former Soviet Union and its former periphery that became independent countries after 1991, right? So do you see Ukraine and other Georgia, etc., Central Asia as places that were colonized, that were part of the Russian Empire, and therefore possibly Russia is trying to recolonize them. Do you accept that narrative, or do you have a different way of framing the Russia-Ukraine relationship? So maybe we could start again with Maria. If you want to tackle that one.
Well, for us, the influence of, what used to be the former Soviet Union was very noticeable during maybe the 50s and the 60s, where there were several groups that participated, in, so as to call them, left-wing movements, from which one of the most severe clashes with these groups were in 1968, where President Díaz Ordaz actually ordered to suppress a student protest. And there is some line there's some theory regarding left-wing groups actually moving and, incentivizing the students to rise against the government during 1968. However, this is just a hypothesis. I mean, of course, there were many different groups involved in the protest, but not only left-wing groups. So in that regard, I would say that there are still people in Mexico who think of Russia as the Soviet Union, or that they think that Russia is still like the Soviet Union. And as we all know, Russia has changed a lot. I mean, from the ideal type of communist country that they used to portray, now they have gone to the other extreme. At least that is my view. That is one thing. And then the other, there is also a prevalent view on this side of the world regarding Russia's size. A lot of people are saying, why would they keep on absorbing other countries if they are already big enough? And let's also consider that Russia on the side of Europe, in terms of development, is very different to Russia on the side of Asia. So in that regard, there is still a lot of questioning regarding what is Russia's intention of keeping on expanding the territory. And obviously there are opinions on this side that say that NATO is part of the problem, but I would say that a more relevant question is asking, why did Russia's neighbors actually decided to adhere to NATO? I think that's a question that a lot of people, at least on this side, they do not understand it, because of course we are not Russia's neighbors. We are neighbors of the United States. But obviously the problems that we've had with the US, they are far from being of, let's say, war or belligerent nature. I think that the last war we had with the United States was in the 19th century. So of course, there is a big difference of perception regarding the proximity of Russia. So I would say that has impacted a lot the narratives regarding supporting or not supporting Russia. But the most prevalent one, it's definitely related to our sometimes peaceful, sometimes tense, and sometimes friendly relation with the United States, and of course the role that Mexico has played within the whole North America region. So I would say those are like the key features of this question.
Thanks, Maria. And over to Nalin.
Yeah, I have basically, if you look at in India, there is a growing consensus about government policy towards addressing the Russia-Ukraine war. And this is because this policy actually stems from India's policy of non-aligned movement. And even now, we believe in the policy of what we call strategic autonomy or multi-alignment. So that is one aspect we have to look at. The second point is that, as you have said, yes, there is a growing perception among the scholars that, yes, it is they think that among particularly few scholars that, yes, it is a war between Russia and West, and Ukraine is a puppet. And in fact, I hold this view actually. Ukraine is a puppet in the entire war. The third point is, in India, there is a growing concern about the human catastrophe because of the war. So that is one concern there is among the, it is there in the if you look at the popular opinion, they say that yes, it is posing a substantial challenge to human security. And having said that, I will go back to the Russian context. Yes, Russia in the post 2014 actually pursuing a aggressive policy, particularly after the Crimea crisis of 2014. So this is again, we have to see, yes, there is a problem with regards to the aggressive nature of Russian foreign policy. But what the Russian scholars, they say they are facing the problem because of the encirclement, the larger encirclement that is taking place through NATO. And that is a cause of concern. And if you look at recently, the North Korean president, he has visited Russia, and now I think that China, North Korea, Russia, they may form a new kind of strategic alliance, and that may create a new kind of challenge to Indo-Pacific. So these are the challenges we are confronting, hence we are looking at in the context of a regional context, global context. But India's view is that the war can be resolved only through dialogue and diplomacy. And war, as Prime Minister Narendra Modi stated, war is not the means to, this is not an era of war. So this is my view. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. There's a few things I want to follow up, but I'll give Bhaso a chance to address this question of perceptions of the Soviet Union and perceptions of whether Ukraine is seen as a colony and Russia is trying to colonize Ukraine.
Well, first, let me say you'd be very hard pressed to find any South African, I think, on average, who would know about the other components of the Soviet Union. So if you were to say Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, they would say, what is that? I think there's just no attention to that part of the world. And so for those who are aware, I would say, again, there is polarization. There is quite a great deal of nostalgia about the Soviet Union, which leads to a kind of even conspiracy type thinking that actually the Soviet Union was collapsed, it should have stayed as it was, and that there was an effort by the United States to tear down the Soviet Union, and in fact used these ethnic identities, the nationalities, Estonia, Lithuania, and all the rest of them in the Baltics and in the Soviet Union's Central Asian territories. So there is a kind of sympathy actually to the notion of Greater Russia, as it were, the old Soviet Union. But there's also then people who would be inclined to support the autonomy of places like Georgia, Ukraine, and so on. But I would say the dominant opinion is more towards favoring Russia. And this is not by accident. As I've said, there's a history of Soviet assistance, but there's also been active courtship by Russia. So when I think of, for example, my university, we've hosted many events with the Russian embassy. This is before the conflict, but the Ukrainian embassy has never reached out just to make that a really low-level practical example. So there has been active courtship by Russia to reach out and to influence public opinion in a way that is favorable to Russia itself. So yeah, thanks, Peter.
Great. And we have another question which asks about China. I mean, Nalin mentioned a little bit about China, and I think it would be worth having some specific discussion of how China's role is perceived, because China's also portrayed itself as kind of neutral and has avoided hasn't recognized Russia's annexation of Crimea. They don't accept that Crimea is part of the Russian Federation, for example. But China, it seems to me, has diplomatically been more supportive of Russia as time has gone on. But I would appreciate your take on this and how your country sees China's role. Do you see it as neutral? Do you see it as a strategic partner of Russia? Maria, I know you've spent some of your career studying East Asian politics, so I'd appreciate your take on China's role in the conflict more generally.
Well, from my point of view, and considering the existing evidence of the actions and the words and discourses that we have seen coming from China, I believe that in this case, their neutrality is helping the oppressor a lot. So from my point of view, I think that they are helping Russia in any way they can, because they have been the ones who have been basically sorting out the impact of the sanctions on Russia in many ways, from the perspective of giving them some sort of supply of materials or any important, I think China has been a major source for Russia to keep on, maintaining the very basic state of their economy, and basically they have been maintaining Russia, economically speaking, because the sanctions from a certain point of view, they have been effective. But on the other hand, in certain fields, it hasn't been effective at all, because China has also bought some raw materials from Russia. So obviously, China's capital is quite a big source of support for Russia. And coming back to the part of China's role on this side of the world, of course, most of its activity is focused on the economic sphere. So in terms, for example, of Mexico, they are our, I think, third most important trade partner after the United States. So obviously China has turned into a major economic actor on this side of the world. And that has also resulted in some Latin American countries getting interested in the One Belt and Road Initiative, or also interested in the, in all these investment projects and loans offered by China. So I would say that this also falls into what I was saying previously in terms of governments and people idealizing China because they are not our neighbors. But for instance, if you ask Japan and South Korea what has been their latest experience with China, the view would be very, very different from the one that we have on this side of the world. So to summarize, from my point of view, I think that China has been very supportive of Russia in this conflict. And I also think that has a very, very strong reason. I think China is looking closely at how the result of this invasion, because still there is some sort of fears regarding Beijing deciding to not exactly invade Taiwan, but threatening to do so. And if Russia actually wins the war, then the risk of war going to the other side of the world, that's a latent risk if Russia wins the war in Ukraine.
Okay, thanks. Back to Nalin, if you want to talk a little bit more about the China factor, which obviously is of great concern to India.
Yeah, this is my personal opinion, is that if you see, China is more interested in prolonging the Russia-Ukraine war, because Russia, China, they are not strategic partners. If you ask any Russian scholars, they will say their long-term enemy is China. So it is because, what I said earlier, because of the alienation from the West, Russia engaged with China. So second point is that China is more interested in getting a strong foothold in Russia because it wants to expand itself, its imperial policy through the OBOR, the One Belt, One Road, which is actually an imperial project of China. China is more interested to recreate those historical memories of colonizing Russia. And I think the best statement was made by President Putin in the aftermath of the just concluded G21 summit, he praised India for holding this summit successfully. So the point is that now I think in future, if you look at, there is going to be a growing competition between Russia and China, particularly in the Siberia and farthest part of Russia, because the way China is expanding into the Siberia and forest, the way they are trying to settle their population in what is known as the yellow perils, the phenomena is known as yellow perils, that is actually causing a strong challenge to Russia's national security in the longer run. So Russia, because of its present crisis, is engaging with China. So if you want to provide some sort of incentive, for example, financial incentives to Russia, if there will be greater engagement between Europe and Russia in terms of trade, I think Russia will slowly alienate its from China's sphere of influence, and I think that is another way through which we can address this issue of Russia-Ukraine war. So this is my view. I think it is my personal view. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
One point I will add here is that China is an imperial power that we have to recognize, and China is threat to global peace and security. Actually, this over route which China is enunciating, it will create human catastrophe in future. So I think there is a greater danger to the global community from China in the forthcoming years. Thank you.
So that sets us up nicely for Bhaso, because I know China is also very active economically in Africa, and that's not been without problems. But would you portray it so harshly as Nalin, that China is a new empire, or is it still a distant partner?
Very good question. I think I go back and forth, and I do understand why Nalin might think so. It is obviously historically a great power, and it does want to reclaim that greatness, and now in a sort of globalized way. But I would say the way it has done so, through which it is going about doing this, is to portray itself as the opposite. That it is historically, that's the argument it uses in Africa, that it's never colonized any part of Africa. And I think this plays right into what Africans want to hear, which is that we are different. We are, as China, not like the other great powers, and we are bringing railways, we're bringing development, infrastructure, and so on. And I think the reaction sometimes from people who are skeptical about China can also be excessive. I think people who are sort of skeptical about China don't always have the best language to warn about China. So there will be, sometimes false claims about, this airport in Zambia or wherever has been seized, the notion of the debt trap, but that's sometimes exaggeration. I've not found clear-cut evidence of this. So I think there has to be sort of a more guarded language that bears out the empirical evidence that has some link to reality. And I would say for Africa, of course, much of the global South, but I would speak for Africa and South Africa, there's a kind of welcoming of multipolarity in a way that maybe is not welcome in other parts of the world, the status quo powers, if you will. So there is a welcoming of multipolarity. China indicates, along with Russia, problematic as it is, indicates for us, and I did see, for example, the question about the underdog. So for much of the world, the bully is the US. For much of Africa, the bully is the US, and of course it's lumped together NATO and with Europe. So I would say China has played its cards very well so far. I think I do take the caution that long term, and it's just in the nature of major powers to become sort of unilateralist. And so I do take the point that China in the long term will exhibit the sort of common traits of hegemons. But so far, I would say that has not been felt on the continent quite yet. So I'll end there for now.
Great, thanks. And we are reaching the end, so I guess I'll give each person a minute or two to make some concluding remarks. And Bhaso mentioned one of the questions asked about the underdog, that Ukraine is the underdog, it's the weaker power, it's being threatened, and that countries in other parts of the world that have also been subject to colonial violence. He was puzzled why there's not more sympathy for Ukraine. And I would add to that the observation that everybody seemed to agree that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was a violation of international law, a violation of the UN Charter, that Russia started the war, the physical violence, which we all agree is wrong and should be condemned. Yet, despite that moral, legal consensus, these questions of historical memory, historical identity, and also some pragmatic economic self-interest seem to be overriding the question of morality. So that seems to be where we are right now. So I'll invite each in turn, again, starting with Maria, just for a minute or so of conclusion.
Well, I would say that Mexicans, they have been largely sympathetic with Ukraine in terms of that we know what violence and seeing violence is like. And of course, public opinion here is quite keen on the idea that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is illegal. And it did take some time for our government to accept it. But currently, since our government said that any violation of the UN Charter is something that we do not support, then naturally our position has now changed a little bit. But obviously, it depends on who you ask the question to, because of course, within our government, there are still sectors that are very supportive of Russia. But I would say Mexico in general and Mexicans are against the war because we know what violence is like and we witness it every day. So of course, in that regard, we have also been open to receive Ukrainian refugees in the country and help them in whatever way we can. There are also some small efforts from certain sectors within the government, not from the ruling party, but from the opposition, to support the Ukrainian government and obviously support the Ukrainian embassy in Mexico in any way that it's possible. The latest development has been an invitation. Well, it was not exactly an invitation, but the discourse of President Zelensky was streamed in our Congress, not in the main hall, but nevertheless our National Congress. So obviously, that shows some sort of sentiment regarding Mexico going back to its original essence of what our foreign policy used to be, which is aimed at doing the right thing, regardless of anything. So thank you very much for inviting me to this panel.
Great, thank you. And over to Nalin.
Yeah, my view is that diplomacy and dialogue are the two means through which the present crisis can be resolved. The second important point is that the global community should recognize that this is a humanitarian crisis. Actually, it is a humanitarian crisis. I think UN should take a lead in addressing the humanitarian concerns. And the third important point I would underline here is that both the parties should respect international law. And UNSC, both Russia and Ukraine should have faith on United Nations Security Council, and so that the war can be, and there can be, we can see that the war can end very soon and peace can prevail. Thank you.
Thank you. And Bhaso can have the last word.
Thank you very much, Peter. I've learned a lot today, and I think I've got a lot to think about. There's so much to think through on this conflict. But I would say, to sort of read it positively, it does indicate a crisis point, but I think a lot of good can come from crisis. And it has been quite a tragic war. But I will also say, look, this is an opportunity to apply international law consistently and to be less hypocritical. I think the inconsistency that is sometimes observed can lead to what we call whataboutism, right? People will say, here in South Africa especially, yes, Ukraine, what about the Palestinians, the plight of the Palestinians? What about the unilateral blockade on Cuba? And so as a result of the inconsistencies that we have seen, there is now a sort of numbness, a sort of casual attitude towards Ukraine, and it becomes kind of an abstract notion. It becomes a kind of forces of history, impersonal conflict. But these are real conflicts with real consequences for people, and I think if there's some good that can come out of it, tragic as it has been, it is that there can finally be consistency and a real global community in which there is uniform application of international law. Thanks a lot, Peter.
Okay, thank you. And I'll hand it over to Zsuzsa Csergo to wrap up.
Thank you very much. And I couldn't have said it more coherently and in a more thoughtful way than Bhaso did at the end, to finish on a positive note, and also highlighting, even if it's difficult for me to say that something good can come out of this war, highlighting the hope that at least internationally this may reinforce some of the good thinking about applying international law and morality globally, universally, fairly and evenly, and thinking about these tragedies through those lens of international law and ethics and morality. So I'm hoping that we can share your optimism, and I'm hoping that this will result in some good internationally. And thank you so much for all this really thought-provoking discussion. I have learned a lot. Thank you so much for sharing this with us, and thank you, Peter, for organizing, for putting together such an excellent panel. And thanks everyone for joining us, for being here. And I hope that you will come back to our next virtual ESN webinar, and that you can also find some time to look at our website and see what's there on the archive for previous discussions that are saved and can be used for teaching. And I hope that we will see you back. Take care.
Bye now.